All right. On the eve of Hear the President's speech, Gallup has a survey, and what they found is that Obama's approval on Afghanistan is at 35%, which is down from 49% in September, 56% in July. Why do you think there's been such a dramatic decline in his approval rating on this?
Look, this war in Afghanistan has gone on for 8 years. What most chilled me was when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff 2 years ago said, in Iraq we do what we must. In Afghanistan we do what we can. This president was dealt a very weak hand. And Sean, we have to admit that.
Right,
this is a tough venture. But today he stood up and said,
Joe, Congressman, he's been president 11 months. Why is the public, this is the Gallup organization, why has his approval rating on Afghanistan declined so dramatically? Is it in large part because he couldn't make a decision for 3 months on the issue?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not, Sean. Look, I was on the ground in Afghanistan when I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit. I worked in the White House as Director of Defense Policy of President Clinton. There is no more important decision than placing the sons and daughters that I led into combat into harm's way. Right. He has now doubled the amount of our troops there. We could not fight during the winter time over there, and you know that, Sean.
Well, wait a minute.
It's the spring offensive that we must be ready for.
The reality is,
therefore, he has accelerated our troops timeline. This president has done it well.
All right, but the reality is the decline in his popularity, the dramatic decline, coincides with the time that General McChrystal asked for the additional troops, which he couldn't make a decision on. Now, let me ask you this question. The Washington Times has an article this week about the rules of engagement, and they are saying rules from interviews of U.S. forces. Tell me if you think this is a proper way to fight a war, that there will be no night or surprise searches. This is what the troops are saying the rules are. Villagers have to be warned prior to searches. U.S. soldiers may not the enemy unless the enemy is preparing to fire first. I don't know how you determine that. U.S. forces cannot engage the enemy if civilians are present, and troops can fire at an insurgent if they catch them placing an IED, but not if they're leaving the site of where they just placed one. Now, you're a former soldier. Do those sound like the rules of war that you can actually use to win? That sounds like, you know, we're tying the hands of our troops.
May I ask you, Sean, were these validated rules of engagement that the Pentagon has said they actually are the rules over there? When I was on the ground, they weren't. Now, let me understand, who validated that these are actually the rules?
Well, Army Captain Casey Thorin, he said it's a framework to ensure cultural sensitivity in planning and the execution of operations. And there have been multiple media reports that confirm that these rules exist. Are you saying that, in fact, that these soldiers that are quoted are lying?
In my talk with everyone in the military, I've never heard of these rules of engagement. Do I believe that we want to make sure that what I went into Afghanistan for initially, and I had to report directly back to Mr. Rumsfeld, that I was part of my mission there was to find out why the rules of engagement were causing undue civilian losses. Now, if we are tightening up those rules so that we're able to also exterminate al-Qaeda, exterminate the Taliban that are very radical, but not to exterminate the support from civilians, then I'm supportive of those. But those are not the rules that are out there that I'm aware of.
All right, but let me ask you one last question. You're going to challenge Arlen Specter in a primary, so we hear.
Yes.
Apparently he came out opposing the president's plan tonight, and wanted to get your reaction. Will that be a part of the campaign that goes on in the primary?
Well, you've talked about polls. If this president or anyone is making their decision about polls or trying to keep their jobs, that's not the kind of senator you want. We've watched Arlen switch on public option. We've watched him switch on card check. We've watched him switch on Defense of Marriage Act. He gave his vote to President Bush for that tragic misadventure in Iraq. I don't know where he's coming from. My issue is this. What's important for America's security? And this president has made a very tough decision, which is the right decision for our security. I'm very supportive of that.
But it sounds like you're saying you admire a president that doesn't go by the polls. I guess that's a lot of admiration for George Bush, because that's kind of how he governed the war. He went according to his conscience.
The difference was with George Bush, if you remember. We now cannot respond to any other war plan. We cannot respond to any other war plan in our arsenal because of that tragic misadventure in Iraq.
But his surge worked. and his surge was successful, and a lot of Democrats opposed it. But I've got to run.
At what cost, Sean? That's the key question.
Right,
he
but
never
it worked.
assessed the cost.
Well, what would
and the cost isn't just
what
money.
if we would have lost? What cost then if we lost?
The cost is that we cannot have an army has done any training for almost 4 years in anything but counterinsurgency.
Right, we got to run.
What's the cost to an army that's nearly broken?
Thank you. When we come back, the former Vice President Dick Cheney